G'day blokes and Sheilas, this is Voyager the Second here. Today we are starting a new series called Intercity Public Transport Showcases. In today's episode, I have a proposal for a high-speed rail line to connect Australia's biggest smokes of Sydney and Melbourne as well as the nation's capital at Canberra. Now, you could travel 900 kilometers between Sydney and Melbourne in less than 3 hours on trains reaching speeds in excess of 380 kilometers an hour, possibly even up to 420 kilometers an hour. The project should cost about $55 billion. I'm not talking about Clara's proposal, which is going to cost $200 billion due to the fact that they are trying to build cities, not just the high-speed rail itself. And we could complete this in 15 to 20 years' time as long as we can maintain a 24-hour construction policy. Now, we need to build this project. I know that people are going to be saying, I can already see this video, I can already see the comments in this video. People are going to be saying, nah, it's never going to happen, mate. The thing is, you know, every proposal of high-speed rail between Sydney and Melbourne, and possibly even Sydney and Brisbane, they've been actually just been proposed by federal government. So, you know, the government said, no, it's too expensive. Let's go for the planes. Let's subsidize the highways instead. You know, just screw high-speed rail. But you know, there's been a lot of problems with not building the high-speed rail. You know, and this is why we need to build high-speed rail between the two smokes in the nation's capital for several reasons. Now, here are some of the reasons why we need to build high-speed rail. We have congestion and overcrowded public transport facilities, and as well as our hospitals. Everything is so overcrowded, and basically everything is all concentrated into all of the population is concentrated into one small area, which is the big smokes between Sydney and Melbourne. And also another real problem. A lot of people do know about this. It's the unaffordable housing. And you know, if houses are so unaffordable, and you know, if we don't have, if houses remain unaffordable and people simply just can't afford to buy a house, people are gonna start. There's gonna be a lot of job shortages, you know, and that's gonna be another problem. And you know, people could move out into the countryside, into the regional areas like Wagga and Cootamundra, but basically there's gonna be nothing there. And this is what I'm talking about. Divided communities, and there's going to be lack of job prospects if you're going to be living in the countryside. You know, you want to look for a job that that fancies good money, eh? So what do you want to do? You can't really do you want to spend $120 a week to drive? You don't really want to do that, you know. You might as well just live close to work. And now in Sydney and Melbourne, you don't do that. And another reason, the Sydney to Melbourne air corridor is actually the third. No, it's actually the third busiest air route. In terms of aircraft movement, with 192 daily flights between the two cities, and now for each direction, that's going to be one flight every 15 minutes. And that's if the airports were operating 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. I'm not sure if they actually do that, but that's how frequent the aircraft movements are on average. Now, to the onboard facilities. These are all the services available. Just check on their availability. Of course, we do need air conditioning. We need the power outlet. We will have power outlets for those who want to charge their computers. There is a dunny toilet. There is the dunny. There is the toilet. I call it the dunny. There are dunnies available. There's also going to be luggage compartments like those ones here, and there's also going to be some bubblers where you can drink. You know, if you're very thirsty, have a sip of water. But what's required though is the Wi-Fi fee. There's a fee required to pay for the Wi-Fi. I'll show that to you in the next couple of slides. Now, unfortunately, there will be no sleepers on the high-speed trains simply because the trips are just relatively short, and also it's going to be quite expensive for you to pay for these sleepers, and it's not really worth it to pay for sleepers unless you want to catch the Sydney to Melbourne XPT. They do provide sleepers there. If you want a sleeper between Sydney and Melbourne, take the XPT. We're not putting it on the high-speed trains. Now, there will be no onboard cafes as well, unfortunately. The next slide is going to explain why we won't have onboard cafes. Now, for the station the station facilities will tell you why we don't have the onboard cafes. But first of all, this is where you will need to get your tickets. You need to buy your tickets to hop on the train. There is a fee that there are a list of fees on hopping on the high-speed train that I will show to you. Now, there's going to be bus interchanges as well as park and rides. We need these up. People can not just the park and ride for bicycles, but possibly even for cars. But I think that there's going to be more bicycle spaces than cars because we want to make the new cities in the countryside the area around the high-speed rail stations very walkable and bike friendly. In Sydney especially, the streets are just so nasty to bikes. And that's why people don't like to cycle to work. Now, there are going to be check-in luggages here. Well, if your luggage is quite heavy, then take your luggage, sure. Now this is why we don't have onboard cafes on the high-speed trains. We're going to have businesses who are going to pay the high-speed rail company some rent. So instead of the company maintaining for all the services on board cafes, we will have retail that are going to be paying the high-speed rail company's profit. The high-speed rail companies are going to the high-speed rail company who could build this high-speed rail line between Sydney and Melbourne will earn a lot of their profits from retailers, not just commuters but also those who buy their land. Now, these are all the fees. A typical ticket will cost you about 8 cents per kilometer. On the Sydney to Melbourne route, it's going to cost you about $71.68. So that's the tip. That's a typical ticket. So if you're a one-off commuter, this is how much you'll be paying. The monthly retail rent for the retail that I mentioned in the last slide, it's going to be about $250 per square meter. So if you're like if you own maybe a 50 square meter, if you own a 50 square meter shop in the high speed which is owned by the high speed rail, where the mall's owned by the high speed rail, I calculated it and it says that you'll be paying about 150 grand a year for your retail outlet. Now, the regular commuter fee, which is for employee commuters. Now, if you want to know who these employee commuters are, these are regular commuters who live in near a high-speed train station but work in a different place situated close to another high-speed rail station. So that, for this instance, you really need to hop on the high-speed train to get to work. So it's going to cost you about 3 cents per kilometer. In this instance, the Sydney to Melbourne, traveling from Sydney to Melbourne for you fellas, it's going to cost you about $26.88. Now, there's also an unlimited rail pass for those who really want to travel anywhere by train. I'm a rail fan myself personally. High-speed rail, regional rail, heavy rail, commuter rail, etc. It's going to cost you about $250 a week plus $40 for any extra days you want to travel. Now, the Wi-Fi fee is going to cost you about $15 an hour. If you want some Wi-Fi, will cost you that. That's how much it's going to cost you per hour. But for the employee commuters, you're going to be paying about $8 an hour because you do. I know a lot of you fellas, you really need your Wi-Fi, so I'm going to give you a discount. Now, these are all the stations here. These are all the stations listed. Now, if you looked carefully at the introduction, not all the stations were shown, especially Sydenham, Campbelltown, WaterGardens, and Sunshine. Those were not shown on the map, but we will show you in full detail later in this video. Now, Central Sydney Terminal is going now. These are all the stations. The yellow here is going to be for express high-speed rail services. The blue, the blue line is going to be for all stations high-speed rail services. Red is for Sydney to Canberra Express, and green is for Sydney to Canberra all stops. Now, there are also going to be direct services from Canberra to Melbourne, but what the thing is, you need to actually all trains traveling from Canberra to Melbourne need to stop at Goulburn first before going to Canberra. And these, just have a look at all these stations, the distance each station is from Central Sydney Terminal, and also check all the notes here, and note that some services stop at some stations. And also forgot to mention, Sydenham and Campbelltown are alternating stops in Sydney, alternating intermediate stops. So that means it's either one train stops at Campbelltown, the other stops at Sydenham, doesn't stop at Sydenham, vice versa. It's the same with WATERGARDENS and Sunshine. Now, for the rolling stock, these are the possible manufacturers. You can have a look at that here. Now, the rolling stock must be capable of 420 kilometers an hour, even though it said in the start that the initial top running speed would be 380 kilometers an hour. But, you know, if we want to make the rail services more competitive, we should raise it to 420 kilometers an hour. 6, 8, 10 or 16 car sets, these are the configurations for the rolling stock, because just remember that some services will couple and decouple with services, especially at Goulburn. Now, the minimum acceleration speed is going to be 0.75 meters per second squared. So if you rail manufacturers manufacture any trains any less than that, then we're not going to accept it. You need to improve the acceleration a bit. They are going to be fully air conditioned, of course, like I said at the start. Air conditioning is present at every high-speed train facility, and each high-speed train requires 4 dunnies per carriage, 2 at each end, 1 for the bloke, 1 for the Sheila. If you don't know what I'm talking about here, I'm talking about the toilet. There are going to be tables for each seat, of course. And so basically, that's all there is to the presentation. Now, this is going to be the full alignment of the high-speed rail line between Sydney and Melbourne. This is going to require 896 kilometers of high-speed rail between Sydney and Melbourne, with a 119 kilometer branch from Goulburn to Canberra. So there are some color coding schemes I would like to address. Now, if you see the orange here, right, this is basically new high-speed rail alignment. This is I'm talking about the lines here. This is going to be a new high-speed rail alignment. Green lines indicate high-speed rail parallel to existing tracks. Now, the sky blue colored sections, especially in Sydney there, that means it's just going to be an underground urban rail tunnel. So it's just going to be short. I'll show you that eventually. Red is rural tunnels. So there will be some there's going to be some tunnels every now and then. There's actually going to be probably even more tunnels than what you'd expect there to be. There's also going to be some now, yellow is existing track alignment, so nothing really needs to be done, maybe except for upgrades perhaps. But the magenta colored here, especially in Melbourne, is dual gauge upgrades, because Melbourne is Victorian railways are usually broad gauge, and this high-speed rail line will be standard gauge. So we need to have some dual gauge tracks so that trains can share tracks with V-Line and Metro. And now for the Canberra section, there's going to be black. Black sections are just upgraded duplications. So we'll get into those eventually. But also with the white, it's just track straightening. And so basically that's all for the track color coding schemes. Now for the stations, yellow stations at Melbourne, ALBURY, Canberra and Central Sydney Terminal. These are this is where all trains are basically going to stop. Magenta stations like Water Gardens, Sunshine, Campbelltown, and Sydenham, these stations are going to be alternating stops for trains. So it's either Campbelltown, Sydenham, or Sunshine or Water Gardens. For these two stops, you cannot stop at both of them at the same time. You'll get what I mean. Don't worry, fellas. Now, blue stations are basically just going to be regional high-speed rail stops. So no express trains will be stopping at those stations. And so yeah, that's basically it. Now, before we check the full alignment, we just want to do a quick inspection of what I'm going to be doing with the Canberra branch. So without further ado, let's have an let's begin the inspection of the Canberra branch. Now, basically, what's going to happen is that there's going to be I forgot to mention that blue here is just sections of track where the high-speed rail tracks are going to connect to mainline rail. This dark purple or indigo section here at Goulburn is where they're going to this is just sections of electrified track. There isn't really much that needs to be upgraded. There is a station at Goulburn. I forgot to mention that Goulburn is just another occasional stops. Now, some trains will need to stop at Goulburn in order to connect with Canberra services. But basically, what I'm just saying is that all trains will stop at Goulburn that connect with Canberra services. Some trains will be connected with Canberra services. Just to let you know with that. Black is just basically upgrades to the existing Bombala branch and also this small section of railway to Canberra. White is basically track straightening here, so there's just some track straightening sections. Now, the top speed of the Canberra branch is going to be 200 kilometers an hour, but the only problem is that it's only going to apply between Goulburn and Tarago. There will be no stops at Tarago, Bungendore, nor Queanbeyan. They will be served by intercity services from Canberra to the city. So now I'm gonna be considering maybe we'll have like how we had the Bathurst Bullet. Maybe there might be the Capital Bullet. So maybe trains running on mainline rail between Canberra and the city, maybe operating once every hour, perhaps. So yeah, that's just basically the Canberra branch. Now there is also a stabling yard at Goulburn, which is going to accommodate plenty of trains, even those that only run directly between Sydney and Melbourne, because there might be instances where there will be track work, and we will also have track work planes as well. You know how we have buses that replace trains. We will have planes that will replace the trains when there is track work. And yes, that will be pretty bad, I know, but we got no option sometimes. But so yeah, and then there's the stop at Canberra. It's just basically using the Bombala section. So that's all there is to the Canberra. So now we will have a look at the high-speed rail sections between Sydney and Melbourne. Stay tuned. Now, from Central Sydney Terminal, we will have new platforms here. We will have to acquire plenty of property at Central Sydney Terminal, and Chalmers Street here. It's gonna be above Chalmers Street. Now, believe it or not, Chalmers Street is actually going to be it's going to be where the new Central Station light rail will be built for the CBD and Southeast light rail. So this is also where the new Central Station light rail will be. But so Chalmers Street, in this section of Chalmers Street will no longer be accessible to traffic. It will only be accessible to buses and light rail. This is going to be another interchange. So basically, Chalmers Street is basically going to be an interchange for Central Sydney Terminal. Now the platforms are going to be about 450 meters long, because we will have those 16-car trains, possibly maybe even extended to perhaps 20-car bullet trains, if the trains do ever get very long. But so basically, this is where all the trains will terminate at Central Sydney Terminal. Now, this green section is just track running parallel. We might consider actually having the tracks will have to go over the East Hills section, and we will also need to go above this intersection. I forgot the name of it. It's Cleveland Street and Regent Street. So it doesn't really matter what the name of the intersection is. But it will have to go above that intersection, and then it will have to quickly sink underground. No, not underground, but just quickly sink on ground and then join up with the existing railway line just north of Redfern Station. Now, the alignment will just use the existing rail tracks, and then it will join on. It will go. Then the trains then move to the western side, and then of the Illawarra line, they will bypass Erskineville, St Peters, and St Peters stations, and we will have a stop at Sydenham station. Now, next near Sydenham station is going to be the Sydenham Maintenance Centre. Now, the reason I wanted to put a stop at Sydenham station is because so that people who are commuting on the Sydney Metro don't have to worry about travelling all the way into the city, but instead they could just change at Sydenham and then hop on the high-speed train to Melbourne. Um, yes, there will be property development around Sydenham, but the thing is, though, we aren't going to go very high because just remember that the Sydenham is right on the path of flights of many planes that are going to be landing in Sydney's airport. So we will have a little bit of development at Sydenham, but not very tall. So maybe we might limit it to about 20 stories at Sydenham. And so that's Sydenham. There's a maintenance centre there where trains will get maintained. There's actually going to be two maintenance centres at Sydenham. Now the high-speed rail is going to join the East Hills line. It will run on the two outermost tracks of the East Hills line, and the trains will run at a top speed of 160 kilometers an hour. Otherwise, that's 100 miles an hour. Maybe with the exception of some very curvy areas. But however, if these trains ever do run during the peak hour, they will actually have to run and at speeds conforming to the existing heavy rail network, which is only about 80 kilometers an hour between Padstow and Walleye Creek. And once it reaches Revesby here, the high-speed rail tracks are going to basically run independently of the existing heavy rail network, though parallel to it, and then both tracks will then run on the northern side of the East Hills line, and they will begin to accelerate at a speed of 225 kilometers an hour, which is about 140 miles an hour. Now we're going to have a short tunnel going underneath Glenfield. No stop at Glenfield, sorry. But it will go underneath Glenfield and then join the existing main south line around at Macquarie Fields, and then it will merge on ground and run parallel, running on the western side, still running at 225 kilometers an hour. Now we are going to have another stop at Campbelltown Station here. And Campbelltown Stations, there's plenty of people who live around Campbelltown. You know, this might be a new CBD. Campbelltown could have the potential to become a new CBD, but this is basically another stop where people can get on from the outer parts of Sydney, can hop on the train to Melbourne. Now from Campbelltown and Macarthur, the high-speed rail line will then run separate. Will not run really on its separate alignment, but will now run parallel to the Hume Highway for most of the leg, all the way up to probably around the Southern Highlands region. And trains will then also accelerate from 225 to 350 kilometers an hour. So it won't go on the top speed just yet. It will go on the top speed once we reach New Burradoo, and I'll show you that eventually. And then it will branch off the Hume Highway at Alpine Station, and then it will run basically on the edge of these townships right around Mittagong and Bowral. Now we have a stop at New Burradoo, which will be served by regional trains and regional all stops services only at New Burradoo. And what's going to happen is that basically because there is nothing at New Burradoo, there's going to be and the high-speed rail line is going to stop there. We're going to have a new station at New Burradoo. Maybe we might rename it to something other than New Burradoo. And there's also going to be a large city centre, and basically New Burradoo is going to be the new Southern Highlands CBD. Now after Burradoo, the trains will then accelerate to a speed of 380 or 420 kilometers an hour. Now we are going to go underneath this state forest. This is actually called Penrose State Forest, and I do not really want to interfere with the land there. And actually this is where we get a lot of trees, and we get a lot of our wood from Penrose State Forest, especially for Aussies. Pardon me. But those who live in Penrose State Forest, the trees we get from Penrose State Forest, we get a lot of the wood there, so we're not going to interfere with that, but instead we'll build a 10-kilometer tunnel underneath the state forest. And then it will emerge on ground again. It will cross over the Hume Highway, and then also on the cross over the main south line just west of Marulan, and then there will be a spur going to Goulburn. There is going to be a stabling yard. It's not a maintenance facility, just a stabling yard. And many high-speed rail services will bypass Goulburn, especially usually it's just the trains that don't connect with Canberra services. And so yeah, there will be a stop at Goulburn for trains that are connecting with Canberra services. And they will bypass Goulburn at 420 kilometers an hour. And it will now the high-speed rail line will continue running along. Maybe I think this is already the Riverina part of New South Wales, but it will run at a top speed of 420 kilometers an hour. There's basically going to be no high-speed rail stop for a long time. There will be a tunnel here. There will be a bit more tunnels than expected, maybe around these areas, possibly maybe one here, simply because of the rugged terrain. It's a bit rough, the terrain, so that's why we will plan more tunnels in the long run. There will be another stop at Cootamundra. This is the next stop on this line, Cootamundra. There will be shops around Cootamundra, and we will have the potential to support possibly around maybe 70 to 150,000 people in Cootamundra, and if we want to support the population, though, we will need some centers around Cootamundra. It's not just one center. There will be central pockets around Cootamundra. It's basically going to be a mini city, a bit like Newcastle already. Anywho, there's going to be a tunnel underneath here because of this sneaky mountain range. Another tunnel here, and then basically the trains will continue running at 420 kilometers an hour. I forgot to mention that trains will whisk past Cootamundra at 420, but at the next stop, which is coming up, Wagga Wagga, trains will have to slow down. Even passing trains will have to slow down when they pass through Wagga Wagga at a top speed of only maybe say 255 kilometers an hour. So basically that's the top speed. We will have to acquire some properties here, unfortunately, but that's the only choice we have. But this is where trains will pass Wagga Wagga at 255 kilometers an hour, but otherwise, if you're not an express train, you could stop at Wagga Wagga. Wagga Wagga is slightly bigger than Cootamundra, so we could have even a bigger city. Wagga Wagga could even be a bigger city, and it's also quite affordable. But anywho, it's going to continue on its own alignment, its own independent alignment, and it will continue running, heading south, pass through the Riverina, and then there's going to be, and then the high-speed rail line will, it's still actually running parallel to the main south line. It's just not being shown. But at Jarogari, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing it right. The high-speed rail will run close to the existing main south line, and then run on the eastern side of the Hume Highway once it reaches this intersection right here. Trains will continue running at 420 kilometers an hour, but then once the Hume Highway gets further from the rail line, that's when the high-speed rail runs in between the main south line and the Hume Highway. But once it reaches this curve here, trains will decelerate to a top speed of 160 kilometers an hour. But I don't think it's necessary to put a speed limit, because in either way, all trains will be stopping at Albury, maybe except for test trains. But if you're a test train, you will pass through Albury at a speed of 160, not 420. And all trains will stop at Albury, and Albury, it's not just going to serve Albury, but it's also going to serve Wodonga. Now it's going to cross the Murray River, aka the New South Wales Victoria border, and then it's going to run on its separate alignment again. And yeah, so basically it's just going to run on its separate alignment. You know, it's just going to fly past at 420 kilometers an hour. Now there is going to be a second maintenance center at Rutherglen. I don't know if I pronounced that right, but we're going to have a new maintenance center at Rutherglen. Unfortunately, there will be no stop for you, fellas. Simply because we would be putting too many stops, and the high-speed rail regional services would just be too uncompetitive. And so basically it's just going to run straight forward to Shepparton at 420 kilometers an hour. And now we're approaching Shepparton, and there will be another stop at Shepparton, which will be served by regional trains. And Shepparton's actually quite a relatively large city, you know, but I think that we could have high-rise apartments and offices and white-collar jobs all packed around the station as well. Not just Shepparton, but also the other stations. Now, the high-speed rail will continue running along its independent alignment. It will have to cross the river. It might interrupt some land. It might interrupt some nature, and then we'll run through Tachera to Lamba, and then it's just going to stay at 420 kilometers an hour. But just south of Avenel or Mangalore, the high-speed rail will meet up with the northeast main line, which is actually what it's called in Victoria. It's still let's say collinear with the main. No, I don't think of the right word for it, but it's going to run parallel to the northeast line. And there will be another stop at Seymour. Now, those houses will be acquired for the shops at Seymour, but it will be served by regional trains. Now, any train that passes through Seymour, this section of curved track will run at a top speed of 420 kilometers. No, not 420. It's actually going to be 250 kilometers an hour through Seymour, or actually maybe say 255. But that's basically just going to be that stop at Seymour, and then the high-speed rail then the trains will accelerate again, but only up to 350 kilometers an hour this time, because we're not so far from Melbourne already. Now it's going to run on its independent alignment again, and that's basically Seymour is the last train station. It's going to be basically the last train station, the last regional stop between Sydney and Melbourne. And then it's going to join the Sunbury line just between Diggers Rest and WaterGardens station. And we're going to, it's just going to run on an alignment, just run on no longer an independent alignment, but run parallel to the Sunbury line. We will have a stop at WaterGardens, which is inside the suburb of Sydenham. It's actually called WaterGardens, by the way, but really WaterGardens is a suitable spot for a high-speed rail stop. You know, we could have some, you know, we could have like some yeah, there's some shops around WATERGARDENS. Now, the high-speed rail line will cross over the Sunbury line onto the western side this time, and so yeah, it's just, and the trains will decelerate to 225, even so that's the top speed of the high-speed line in the Melbourne section. Albion Stabling Yard is also another stabling yard, and there will be another stop at Sunshine Station. You know, it's a relatively large interchange station. Even V-Line services will stop here. But basically, the high-speed rail services are going to join up with the existing rail line, but it will run on dual gauge tracks. It's going to require some it will require some track upgrades to accommodate for rolling stock on both gauges. Now the trains will, once it reaches the dual gauge track, trains will no longer run at slow speeds, possibly maybe 115 kilometers an hour, and it will basically then approach Melbourne. You know, it will just run on the existing alignments to Melbourne, with upgrades to the gauge, so that we can allow for trains, so that we don't really need extra 2 tracks. It just requires upgrades. And so there's Melbourne Southern Cross, where commuters can change for rail services into other parts of Melbourne. And so basically that's the entire high-speed rail alignment, blokes and Sheilas. And so there you have it, fellas. This is the entire high-speed rail alignment. I hope you enjoyed this video. Anyway, guys, I'm going to wrap this up. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like and favorite the video. I will see you next time. Goodbye for now.